My humble beginnings was in South London in a place called Balham. I was born in Balham. I grew up in a place called Clapham South. My time in terms of growing up was I went to a primary school called Bonneville and had a friend who went to the same school, and his uncle was Jimmy Page. So Jimmy used to come to the house and I would be there, and we used to take the mickey out of this guy who's playing guitar because we didn't rate him. We didn't think he was that good. So we used to take the mickey out of him, which was fun. But by the time I left school, left primary school and got to secondary school, I started to look at what talents I had in terms of what could I do as a living, what could I do, right, as a human being, basically. What was I going to do? I was at school, things was going well. Um, I was at a grammar school, which meant that there wasn't many people of my colour at that school. By the time I got to 13, the school had changed and became a comprehensive school, the first in the country. So again, there was a massive change because here it was now, the school where I would say 60% now of the pupils in the school were black, whereas before when I started school, it would have been 99.9% white, 1% black. So it was a huge change that was taking place around about 13, 14. My friends and I decided to put a band together. It was like 12 guys. We all were singing, right? And we would do pub gigs. So we would go around to pubs and ask if we could perform. And we managed to get some pub gigs together. And I was very shy at that time. So I'm lead singer, but I'm the shyest member of the band. Because everybody was there and it was fun when we could look at one another and laugh and joke, and it was just a wonderful experience of firstly doing talent contests and then winning a few, losing some, having the rows that you do, if you had done this and if you hadn't done that. So we had all of that going on through 14 to 17. And by the time I left school at 16 and went to college at 17, I decided to put a proper band together. So I got a hold of a guy called George Anderson, who ended up playing for Shack Attack.
Have you interviewed him?
Yeah,
Nice guy.
and he is a lovely guy. Paul Gendler, who ended up playing for a band called Modern Romance. He was on guitar. Dennis Watson was the drummer. Dennis went off to become a lawyer, right, and still has a fantastic career. And myself, Tony Fairweather, and a guy called Cornell McCoy, the three of us were up front. So we were like an early 3+3 Isley Brothers kind of vibe, right? Because at the time, Who's That Lady had just come out. And what was going on in the UK was jazz funk was happening. So Bob James, Grover Washington, Ronnie Laws, all of those people were making huge inroads. And most bands coming out of the UK at that time wanted to sound like that, wanted to be doing jazz funk.
It's still jazz funk, I
I
think, very
wanted,
much in the UK. It has always been a culture for jazz funk.
very true, but I wanted to do something slightly different. I wanted to do something that came more from the rock end of the UK and mix that with R&B. So I wanted to do something which had more rock and roll and R&B, a mixture, opposed to it being just jazz funk, and that would be it. So I started out with my band, and my band was called Atlantis, and we started to do some gigs up and down the country, mainly in the Midlands, which was like Leicester, Derby, maybe Birmingham, Coventry. So we were doing that, 17, 18. So I was young and learning this craft. But what I found was I could write songs. I could listen to how people constructed songs, and I was able to construct the songs. So we didn't do covers. We weren't a band who was going out and doing cover songs. We was a band going out and doing an hour's worth of original songs, which at that time was pretty much unheard of. So, but I was like stubborn and wanted to project a different narrative to the music so that we would never be, as a band, we would never be put into a pigeonhole as, oh, they're just another jazz funk band. oh, they're just another rock band. Oh, they're just another. I wanted something that was going to be very distinctively us,
Did
or
you
very distinct.
sorry to interrupt you, Junior.
That's right.
Did you dislike jazz funk, or was it more a
No,
way of integrity that you wanted to do your thing?
yeah, I think it was more about integrity. I think it. I love jazz funk. All of those artists that I mentioned, I still I've got their albums. So it wasn't that I didn't love the music. It was I didn't want to. I didn't want to be an artist who copied other
You want to
artists.
be a leader, not a follower
Yeah,
necessarily.
exactly. Exactly. Because all of the people that I was buying, they were leading things. Earth, Wind and Fire were leading band. You know, the Doobie Brothers, leading band. Ohio Players, leading band. Chaka Khan, Aretha Franklin. My mother was into Mahalia Jackson, so I heard a lot of that, and Ella Fitzgerald. My father was into Dave Brubeck, and so jazz, and jazz was very, very much a part of where I came from. And as much as I have and still do, a huge love for jazz, I wanted to do something that would distinctively say, that's Junior. Not, that guy sounds like. I wanted people to be able to hear my music and say, that's Junior music. That's Junior.
But
That's style.
you have a Caribbean heritage as well. Has that influenced you maybe more in the background than not necessarily in the front? Do you know what?
Well, to be honest with you, yeah, to be honest with you, when I first, during my 17, I was between 15 and 18, a lot of the things that I was doing was within that reggae world. So I knew a lot of the musicians out of Britain that was doing reggae at the time. Early Steel Pulse, early Aswad, all of those bands that became huge bands in the UK after 20 years or so. We all pretty much started out on the same basis, doing a kind of lovers rock vibe. But for me, what it was that like I saw how a lot of these artists were being ripped off and they were young. So it was stunting their growth. They were angry and didn't fulfill their potential because of the fact of how things were going, how people perceived them, how people perceived the music, how the producers would take the money, how the engineers weren't getting paid, so we didn't want to work with you. And it was seeing all of that.
Did you
And I didn't
experience
want to.
a lot of, you said that you came initially from a school with maybe 99.5 uh, uh, white
White
people,
people.
yes. Because when I listen to your catalog, I often think that you are maybe more socially conscious or aware than people are aware of, because you have those on almost all albums. You have a socially message and sometimes very sad lyrics. Is that
Right.
a
I
result
think,
of your upbringing, maybe, or those experiences?
yeah, I think it's very much so. I think for me, socially, it was important to talk about where I was coming from and what I was seeing, what was going on. When I did Too Late, everybody in the record company turned around and didn't want the record out. So I had to fight to get the record out.
That
And
was
that was
the
because,
song I thought about initially. It's a very, very sad
right,
song. Can you tell us a little bit more? Please continue to
yeah,
talk about that song because it's very special.
thank you. I had gone to Edinburgh and I was on tour. While being on tour, it was like the Edinburgh exhibition, it was a festival. And I met this young lady and she was a punk because punk was in at the time. So she was taking me around and showing me the different arts and crafts and stuff. So we started talking and she started to tell me about her particular life, which was that her mum and dad, her father was a drunk, an alcoholic, and he used to come in on a Friday night, he'd come in and he'd beat up his wife. And the children would be there, and this was a normal scenario for them. And I knew people in London who had gone through exactly the same kind of thing. Their fathers were not even so much a drunk, maybe just work and the pressures of work, the pressures of being a young father coming from the West Indies and being taught how to discipline children in a particular way and then using that same discipline on their children in this country, but it would seem barbaric because of how strict the belt would be out. The wire from the ironing board would be torn out and used. You know, the slipper would be used, the shoe would be used. They didn't care. And I watched various people, friends of mine, people who I just met, and heard their story too. And I wanted to reflect that. I wanted to say something about that, make it quite clear that, like in 1982, right, putting your hand on anybody, right, was completely out of order. And I was not going to be a part of that
You
scenario.
were
I wanted
it's
to talk,
10 years too late.
yeah, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted people to hear that this does go on. I wanted people to be affected by it in a way that they would go to their own politicians, their own people in power, and speak about it. Right? So it became something of a more of a forum, more of something where society was going to say no to this way of dealing with man and woman, dealing with a particular, well, not particular, all kinds of scenarios where women were being underplayed. Women were being treated as second class citizens. Women were being treated as something that you could slap around, and it was normal. And I was saying we should be looking at all of these things and realizing they're not normal, they're abnormal. I didn't come from that family. I came from a family of 8 brothers and sisters, right? And mom and dad, so there's 10 of us in a house, and we didn't have that. Of course, my parents had their arguments and whatever else, but that whole thing of trying to slap down somebody, or, even just the way that you would speak back to my older sisters and stuff, I couldn't talk in a particular way. I had to have respect. And I noticed in the time during that period of time, in the early 80s, late 70s, that respect wasn't there. Men didn't respect women in that kind of way and treated them abominably. And I wanted to highlight that. So when I did Too Late, everybody said, like, after Mama used to say, how could you do a track like Too Late? But what it was Too Late's musical beat grabbed people. Bass line grabbed people. They loved the bass line. They loved the whole easiness of the track and the dance sway of the track. And they could go with the chorus. Everybody could sing it, too late, baby, bye bye. Everybody could sing along.
But
When it
actually,
came to,
Junior, there is a serious undertone, I think, as well in Mama Used to Say.
yeah,
I mean, you
he
dig a
was
little
song.
deeper
He was,
into that song. So, I mean, it's
yeah.
not just Mama, Mama, there's
Mama used
something
to
more to it.
say it's a lot more with most of the songs. They dig a bit deeper than the surface of how people perceived it at the time. We, when Mama came out, because Mama was a record that everybody, oh, my Mama used to say, that's so lovely. And when you listen to the lyric and you realize that, like, I don't think there's a mother alive that hasn't said what was said in that song at some stage to their children, right? So it wasn't a far-fetched song. It was a song that was relevant to every human being, right? And especially if you were a young child growing up. The whole thing of rushing to get old, we all did it. We all wanted to be 16 when we were 14, 18 when we were 16, 21 when we were 8. We all were rushing to get to these societal landmarks of age. When what my mother was teaching me was that there was no rush, right? Just take your time and flow through this life. Enjoy this life. Enjoy each section of it. So being a teenager, enjoy it. Being a young adult, enjoy it. Being a middle-aged man, enjoy it. Being the young age of old, enjoy life, which was the key to my family's being, was that we were told it wasn't about trying to get a first A or be a university bud or have a business and be a millionaire. It was never about that. Within my house, it was always about, first and foremost, enjoy yourself, be happy, most importantly. keep your mind at ease so that there is no stress that you allow to come in and pull you down. So that then if that happens, you don't think properly. You're
Did
stressed.
people back then? I guess you were in the early 20s, something when you recorded that album and song. Were you considered a young man with an old spirit back then? Because it's rather mature material for a young man on this album.
But I think, as I said, being the youngest of 8, right? I had 2 older brothers and 5 sisters, right? Who were much older, who were into all kinds of different things, and gave me the chance to say, no, I don't want to do that. Yes, I'll do that. No, I don't want to. I was watching from a distance, being able to assess. And I think what I wanted to do, as I said, I wanted to make music that was very much me. I wanted to say things that nobody else was saying at the time, right? Everybody was into a particular kind of love song. I didn't want to write love songs at that period. I wanted to write socially aware songs.
Were you a child or a young man that were observing a lot? Because you said that you were rather shy, and I might see a young man observing life in a maybe a deeper level than most men in your age did.
I used to go during that during that period of time of, I would say, during my real strong development in terms of the growth of Junior Giscombe started really between 16 to 18. 16 to 18, we had what they called a sus law here. So you could walk down the street and just by your appearance, you'd get stopped, you'd get frisked. And this was happening pretty much a lot to young black kids. So there was animosity being built up between us and the state, us and the police, us and authority. And that kind of like went boom in 1981 when we had the riots. And again, being able to walk through that, which I did during that period of time and was there to observe, to see, all of these things were part of what I was doing. And my friends would go out and go to the West End during the day, and I'd be going to some kind of theatre or going to some art thing or going to an exhibition. And I would do this on my own. I wouldn't go with anybody, and I wasn't telling anybody I was doing it, right? But what it was doing was it was giving me such a wider perspective on life. The artists that I chose to listen to for their lyrical contents during just after the Vietnam War, when Curtis Mayfield would say the things that he was saying, the Lost Prophets would say what they were saying, Gil Scott Heroin would say what they were all talking and enlightening you about the world that you were living in and the way that people were constructing other people's lives, putting people into a mental state that worked for them. I saw that, and I wasn't going to be a part of that. So I wasn't going to go out and do a 9 to 5 job and be told, this is your worth. I needed to find what is my worth. And when I found what was my worth, I realized I could go and work for nothing at the same time and work for 1 million, right? It's down to you, not to some individual who comes along and says, well, you know what? I think you're worth 5 grand. I think you're worth 50 grand. I think it's not for you to tell me my worth.
How
And I
how
learned that.
how involved
Sorry, go on.
were you, Junior, in the production of Mama? You wrote it, but Bob Carter was the main producer, or was it co-produced by you? Or
Bob and I worked on a co-production basis. So I would write the songs and I would come in, and Bob was a great arranger. And so I would come in with the song. Bob and I would arrange the song. I would then turn around. We used a guy called Chris Porter to engineer. And Bob and I would produce. So we produced this first album. And when we got to, unfortunately, when we got to the second album, because of the amount of success we had, Bob felt that he was the man. So it was about Bob Carter, not Junior. And that was such a shame because what we had done on the first album, right, was we collaborated and we worked together trying to make the best kind of music that we could. When we got to the second album, it was all business. A bit like, and that's you learn in this game. Bob I was my friend, and I would still, he's passed now, but I would still call Bob my friend. The music industry has a way of taking away your friend and twisting your friend into seeing you as an enemy. And
How much, Junior, did you and maybe Bob listen to Gap Band and Jawbone Peoples and the Total Experience music? Because I hear those elements in the
oh yeah,
song and a couple of
Bob
others.
Bob didn't really listen to that music. Bob was more breaking glass. Bob was more rock. Bob was more Genesis. Bob was more
Melody, maybe.
that music. Yeah. So Bob didn't really listen to R&B. It just wasn't his thing, right? Whereas for me, it's like when I did Mama Used to Say, I wanted the Bob was his classic stuff. So that's what made, I think, the record so much fun, was that the things that I wanted him to play, he couldn't play. So the whole thing was to compromise to a place whereby I was happy and he was happy. And once we had gotten to this happy place, right, that was it. We'd done it. We'd reached that kind of, we can both live with this. We can both turn around and feel proud of this.
When you talk about this and how Bob maybe wanted to be in the spotlight on the album covers, I think of when I interviewed Charlie Wilson. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and we talked about Total Experience. You know, when they were on that label back then, there was the head of the company, Lonnie Simmons.
Uh-huh.
His name was as the executive producer on almost all albums. Charlie told me that he was not involved at all. But he was just
He
good
was never
to
there,
promote himself. So,
which is which is a lot of the time what happens
yes,
with a lot of artists.
yes.
When Bob and I were doing the second album, I was doing it in the morning and he came in the evenings, and then I would come in the evenings and he would come in the mornings. We didn't actually work together, right? So it was a terrible scenario because I would put something down, he'd come and wipe it, put down some, I'd come and wipe it. So we had to get together, sit down and chat, get to a place whereby we're not going to work together in the way we used to. It's just not that anymore. But we can still do this, right? You know, we can still do this and we can still make this work if we understand and respect what one another's doing. But concerning like Charlie Wilson and stuff like that, there was a lot of artists in America during that period of time. You would see on the back of an album, executive producer, so and so, and they were nowhere to be seen, right? You know, the artist would do, as I did, the artist would go in and do your records, right? And then it would be put out. Like I remember, short story, George Michael. George Michael came to me and said to me, just before Wham, that he wanted to make a record, right? It's going to be bigger than, I'm going to be bigger than you. Because we knew one another again way back. So he was taking the mick, you know, I'm going to be bigger than you. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do this. And he then turned and he said, I'm going to work with Bob. So I said, really? So he said, yeah, I'm going to work with Bob. Because I know it was Bob Carter that did that track, not you. So I said, okay, cool. So he went off, he went and worked with Bob. Then I went to a club down in, where was it? Just in the West End. And who should I see? George Michael. So George comes up and George says to me, I won't tell you the actual words because they're very explicit, but he turned and he said to me, man, right, how did you do that record? Because it wasn't him. So I said, I know, it's a joint effort, George. It was joint. He said, yeah, but it doesn't work for me. So he's saying, so who should I work with? So I said to him, you started with Chris Porter, right? So he said, yeah. So I said, just you and Chris going. And for 20 years, him and Chris used to go in and they'd make records. You
How
know,
did you
it's
guys
sometimes,
hook up initially? Were you in the same kind of neighborhood or in the beginning of the
yeah,
industry or?
we were going to the same clubs. Me, him, Boy George, Marilyn, right? All of us. We were going to the same clubs. We were listening to the same musics. Johnny Rotten, met up with Johnny Rotten at Bob Marley's gig. You know what I'm saying, right? Because he loved Bob Marley. So it was that kind of thing. You had all of these artists. Annie Lennox loved Grace Jones, wanted to be the white version of Grace Jones. So all of these, all of these artists, right, you're meeting up with. And their idols were all black artists.
It is very, very
So,
strange, Junior, because do you agree when I say that it, especially maybe for black music, it has to cross over in overseas first, then
mm,
it can comes back to the UK or to Europe and cross over. And it's the same from the US. They cross over in Europe and then it comes
agreed.
back. It's a,
Sometimes it's crazy,
yeah, because
but
you
what
were
it
one of
does
the
say
first
is to
soul
do that.
music artists to, or UK artists, maybe soul artists to cross over really big in the US.
Mm.
People were,
I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing scenario because at that time, you would sign to a record company and they wouldn't put your record out in any other country other than the UK. So if it didn't work in the UK, that was it. Your career was over. Next. With myself, what happened was it didn't work in the UK. And I went out on tour with Lynx. But I had an A&R man at the time who had a lot of foresight and said to me that he knew of a DJ called T. Scott who was on WBLS, which was the number one radio station in America and in New York. And he said would I be up for a remix? Now, I didn't know what a remix was because nobody did remixes. It wasn't common. So when he said that I want to do a remix, I want somebody else to mix it. So I said, okay, fine. So he gave it to T. Scott. T. Scott had an hour slot on a show with a DJ called Frankie Crocker.
famous
Now
DJ,
Frankie Crocker,
yes, house
now
music
Frankie,
era, or the beginning of that anyway.
that's right. Frankie Crocker was like the DJ. If Frankie played your record, then every station in America, right, who did black music would be playing your record the next morning. That was a given. So T had done a remix and they sent it over to me and I was going into a studio, right, up in, right, which was called Rack Studios. And Rack Studios was where Kim Wilde used to make her records. So I went in there. It's got great ambient sound. So I went in there and when we put on it was a cassette back in those days. And they sent me the cassette. And when I put it on in the studio, I just was beaming from ear to ear. I couldn't stop
What
smiling.
was the difference on the songs?
The,
The
the difference
BPM
was,
or
I was, no, what it was, the DPMs was exactly the same. He didn't change it or make it any faster or slower. But what T did was, he took away, I wanted a very ambient rock and roll sound, original sound. But what he did was he dampened all the sounds. Kind of like we would back in the day call it like an E-slate sound. So everything was much more dampened, but much more hard hitting. So whereas we had the bass line pretty much in an ambient sound, so it didn't punch through, he took away all that ambience and all that reverb and put it right down into just a real gritty home R&B bass line, which at the time, again, nobody was playing bass lines just going straight. Nobody was doing that. And he took away all the rubbish around it and centralized it with the drums, which was now wasn't straight R&B drums, was rock and roll drums. It was on the backbeat. No, we were going to front beat now, right? So the whole thing was taken to so that it was emphasizing all of the nice parts about this track. The drum pattern, right? The guitar, right? Being open. Nobody was doing drums like that, right? Nobody was making that kind of sound. So when T did the remix, he played it on Frankie's show, and the next day it was like that was it. This record just kicked off. It was like I was on tour with a band called Lynx
Right.
in
David
England
Grant.
because I was part of the band, David Grant.
Oh,
I was on tour, and I always remember, right, the record company ringing me up. I think I was in Birmingham, and they were like, "We sold 100,000 copies, right, in Alabama." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, that's cool." Next day, we sold 50,000 in Chicago. Next day, we sold 100,000. This record just was. And the thing about the record, the other thing was, the record company in America would not put money in to promote it. And that was really the thing that got me with the record. The record was the people's record, the DJ's record, right? And no money was actually put in to push that record. That record became a number one hit in America without the American company spending any money. They spent nothing.
can you still
The record,
earn your living through that song still
yeah,
today?
to today. I can go anywhere in the world, right, and get paid very nicely, right, and sing that one song.
But I mean, ambience, you talk about ambience. That is also something I think that has been a part of your releases over the years, to
Mhm.
have an ambient kind of sound. And years ago, I predicted in a way that R&B today would contain a lot of ambience. And so,
And it does.
in a sense, you were a bit ahead of your time. Did that inspiration came from jazz funk, from Ronnie Laws, for example, or where did that come
Yeah,
from?
a lot of that came from listening to, right, old jazz, right, right, and the Mahalia Jacksons, the sound, Lady Day, it was the sound that they were able to have within this music that they were making. And because everybody wanted to do, as I said to you earlier, jazz funk didn't lead to an ambient sound. Jazz funk was very much closed in, right? Which I love. And T. Scott managed to do that with Mama for me. But again, when I went to America, a lot of people turned around, radio stations would turn around and say, "I don't know why you remixed it. We love the original. We love the ambient sound, the big sound." And I was like, wow, it's lovely to be able to know that, like, what you did and what you allowed somebody else to do. People liked both. It was the first record in American history to have the ambient version plus the T. Scott version played back to back. So I've got tapes, and Mama used to say, being played on a radio station for 12 minutes. Crazy, right? But that's how this record just seeped into the consciousness of people. And I think at the time as well, people weren't making records that sounded like that. They weren't saying what Mama was saying. They weren't saying what Too Late was saying. So we were changing the course of music and opening up to an American audience, to a European audience, that there was black British artists who could make this music from Britain that could stand side by side with what everybody called American music. We could now stand side by side. We were now making records that Americans didn't know it came from England, right? The sound was that good. And also what we started to find was they didn't care. So long as the songs were good and it was about the song initially, you could have a great sounding record. But if you don't have a song in there, then the sound's neither here nor there. You've got to have something that makes people feel a part of it.
But I think that
And I think,
that you are maybe a man of heart, a man following your heart, and that's maybe also why I think that most of your albums, they are pretty eclectic. There are
yes,
a little bit of everything in them. There is gospel, there's rock, soul, R&B, funk. Do you think that
mhm,
this eclectic side of you would have been a disadvantage sometimes towards your fans because they maybe didn't know exactly where they have you?
no. I mean, if you consider most, I would say, record companies, radio stations, there was a perceptional look of how you should look, how you should be. So Junior goes on stage and Junior's got his hand in his pocket and he's clicking his fingers. He isn't jumping up and down and dancing and trying to do a Michael Jackson. He's doing Junior. Everybody's like, oh, no, 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 no. You've got to have a dance routine. You've got to have a... Because that was what was shown to be the way that black artists, right, should be projecting themselves. I was coming from a place of, you're not going to tell me how to project who I am. You know, how dare you? I wouldn't turn around because of the colour of your skin and say, how come your hair's short? You should have long hair. You should be this. You should be smoking a joint. You should be... Right? I was like, I'm not going to allow you to do that to me. Again, these things were false narratives. These things were things that people wanted you to do because it went along with the tradition of how things were.
When
I wanted to break that.
I interviewed
So,
Roachford, I assume you know him,
yeah,
of
yeah,
course. I asked him if it sometimes was a struggle for him to be a black rock guy, and he actually said that there were some difficulties because the black
yeah,
audience expecting you to do maybe reggae or soul or jazz funk. And
right,
have you experienced the same thing?
yeah. When I first came out in England, with Mama used to say, most people would turn around and say, "Nah, that ain't R&B. That's rubbish. That's pop. That's this. That's..." There's an expectation of the sound and the style that you're supposed to give off. And where I was coming from was that, like, you shouldn't have that expectation, right? You should deal with what you're seeing. You like it, you don't. Don't be in betweeny. In betweeny doesn't work, right? So here's Junior. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But I'm not going to change to suit a narrative of somebody who is sitting at home watching me on TV and saying, if he did this and if he did that, and I wasn't going to do that. And I also felt that would, if I did go down that road, I also felt that was like saying, it was like giving in.
Was it
To me, it
was
was
it a
like giving
struggle,
in.
do you think, for the labels as well? Because they maybe didn't know where to put you.
Yeah, it was a struggle for them. They had no idea of what to do. When I was in America and I managed to, I'm in a hotel room. Eddie Murphy's in the hotel, but he's in the room below me. I've been given big speakers, monitors, and whatever else, so I'm playing my music as loud as I can. Stamping on the floor, this, that, and entire, hoping that Eddie Murphy would get so fed up that he'd either come upstairs or he'd send somebody upstairs. Nothing. This went on for about 3-4 days, and then I had to leave and come to New York. I left and I came to New York, but before leaving, I went downstairs and I pushed my second album, right? Inside Looking Out. I pushed my second album under his door and then I left. When I got back to England, I got a phone call from the record company. And the phone call went something like this: Junior, yeah, glad you're back. Thanks, man. Just had some guy called Eddie Murphy, right, who's making a film, and he's asked if you can do a track for the film. So from the time that you tell me some guy called Eddie Murphy, I know that you have no idea of who he is because you're not tracking black music, black entertainment. You've got no time for it. In your mind, I was lucky. I had a little hit record. Excuse me. I was lucky. I had a hit record. People liked it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we didn't have to spend too much money on it. We didn't have to. So there was that kind of mindset. So when I did Do You Really Want My Love, I did it as a demo. The demo got into the film. The film became the #1 film in the world at the time. There wasn't one TV, radio, or media in Britain that even asked for an interview because it was a black guy, no white guys involved from the UK, but this black guy is in the #1 movie in the world. The album has sold 170 million copies. The album has been nominated for a Grammy, so he's also a Grammy winner. And he's this little black guy from South London, Balham. And to them, they didn't want to see that. So I only did one interview during that period of time, and that was with Gary Bird. I don't know if you remember Gary Bird. He did a record called The Crown, right? Who Wears the Crown? He had Stevie Wonder play on that and sing
Right.
on that. But Gary came over to England and was asked by Steve Wright to fill in for him on his show. And he rang my manager and said, I don't believe it. How is it possible that the number one film in the world, the number one album in the world, the only person from the UK involved is Junior, and I've not seen him anywhere. There's nothing recording the fact of what he's achieved. Well, that was Britain at that time. Britain didn't want to push a black artist. That wasn't going to happen, right? They wanted you to make a record, here today, gone tomorrow, see you later. Because my success wasn't in England, my success was outside of England, coming back to England. It meant that I had kudos. I was able to work outside of them. So whereas they wouldn't, the record company wouldn't project Junior, wouldn't get Junior that TV show, wouldn't get Junior that Martin Luther King Day, the 20th of January, I wanted to do a big festival in the UK. This was back in 84, 85, and they wouldn't do it. They didn't see the relevance of Martin Luther King. When I spoke about Marcus Garvey, my mother was a Garveyite, so because of that, you can imagine my whole, again, upbringing with the family, coming from a Marcus Garvey perspective, was again about history, knowledge of knowing yourself, and being able to project who you are, not who others want you to be. All of that was given to me as a young man coming through. So when the record company didn't acknowledge me in the way that they should have, when the promotions didn't do what they should have done, when marketing didn't do what they should have done, most people would have been incredibly hurt, would have turned around, I suspect, and be in the press and telling the press all about it and stuff. For me, it was just not vindication. For me, it was an acknowledgement of what I knew, right, that I was up against. And I didn't make it a problem. It was a problem, but I didn't make it a problem. I still continued to do what I did, to their annoyance, mind you, because they were all very annoyed. But again, as I said, it didn't bother me. I wanted to ensure that, solely that, what you're seeing today is Junior Giscombe. You're not seeing an individual who started out one way, went down the avenue of trying to do films or trying to do theatre or trying to do... I've never done any of those things. I've never wanted to do any of those things. All I wanted to do was make music.
Was it
And
the label's idea that you should book a flight to Minneapolis?
no, that was mine. I, I loved, I loved, I loved. My very first show was in a place called Hinchley. And the band who was supposed to open for me was The Time. And they had just done their first album as well. So, 11, oh, mate, great
The
record,
bird.
great tune. Loved that. The bird and everything, right? So they did their first album. They'd had a hit in America. I was told that they wanted to come over and open for me. I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is wonderful. But unfortunately, I don't know what happened on their side, but they didn't come. But I'd always been a fan of them, always been a fan of Prince.
Gemma Lewis.
Yeah. So having the chance to, I was asked, who would I want to work with? And I said I'd like to work with The Time, right? Because I know that The Time is Prince. So they said, well, not sure if we can get Prince, but what about Monty Moore? So I said, hold on a minute. Monty did Pleasure Principle, right, with Janet Jackson. And I loved that
If
tune.
you were here
So I'm like,
tonight,
please. Yeah. And I loved it. So I said, like, yes, please. Okay. If he's up for it, I'll go over. I want to do this.
this was
And
a little bit post
later on,
post flight time. He was working independently.
that's right. That's right. Because he was at a studio called Creation, which is where we recorded all the stuff that we recorded. But I just fell in love with Monty as a person, one of the nicest people that I'd ever met in this industry. Just a lovely, true soul. You know, nothing false about Monty. He is who he is. He does what he does, right? He doesn't try to be like anybody else, right? He's not interested in that. He doesn't even, Monty wasn't even listening to a lot of music. It wasn't like Monty, oh wow, he's listening to so much music. Monty wasn't like that. I just loved Monty. We became brothers, you know, just entwined on one another. We just seemed to,
Just
we,
checking my
I
Instagram, see if he's responded.
sorry,
I'm just checking my Instagram to see if he responded. No, no,
he
he
responded.
wasn't able.
No,
No, next time, Junior.
next time. But he was just such a wonderful, wonderful individual, Monty. Everything about Monty, if you ever have the chance to truly meet him, you're meeting one of the nicest people within this business that you could ever meet. He's just solid, true, honest, real, and showed me a lot about Minneapolis.
He's
Again,
also a bit in the background kind of person, like
oh
yourself.
yes,
Maybe you connected there a
yes.
bit.
I think that's most probably why we hit it off so much, he and I. Because it wasn't like we would get we'd be invited to all kinds of different things, and Monty would ring me and say to me, "Are you going?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not really." It's like, "Great, I don't want to go anyway." The glitz and the glamour and all that kind of stuff after being on stage was never what we both were into. I think we both came from that thing of going on stage and giving of ourselves. Once off stage, we have families. And, you know, I had 4 children and I've got grandchildren. And I wanted to make sure I spent a lot of time with them. And having a relationship with my children became the most important thing as I went along. I'd noticed that, like a lot of other artists, had children, put their musical career first, and when the career started to go on the wane, were rushing to have a relationship with their children, and their children didn't want to know.
I interviewed
And
the late Tito Jackson a few years ago,
okay,
and I asked him why it has took him so long to release a solo album. It was
mhm.
maybe, I can't remember, 40 years or something. But he said that the family always comes first. So that was his priority. That was a very nice thing to hear from him. And it seems to be the same with you, Junior. And you just glow of love and of joy and of but you have had very hard times as well. I've read about your
Yeah.
wife and one of your daughters, and I was actually crying when I read about it.
Ah,
It must be extremely hard for you during that period. How did you cope with that situation?
my partner, when she was diagnosed with MS, again, it was at a time whereby we didn't know what MS was. Had no idea what it was. There weren't any books for us to go and read. So we were kept in the dark for about 2 years. And in that period, the various things were happening to her in terms of not being able to walk, having blackouts, seeing white flashes, and all of these things was happening. And there wasn't anything that I could do. I didn't know anything about this thing, nothing. And fortunately, she stayed around until she was 50. So she had had it for at least 20. And all they really gave her was ibuprofen at the time, saying that that was the only thing that would work. Well, obviously, as the years have gone on, there's various bits and pieces of information coming through. the internet was there, so I was able to start reading more now about it. And then we found that Janique had been diagnosed with it as well. And I spent 8 years really with Janique, really learning about MS, learning about medicines and plants and how they work for you, what is good for you. I went holistic opposed to dealing with the chemical side of things. As soon as it was one of those situations where when we started the journey, everybody poo-pooed the journey. Just like making music, like because you're not doing it the way that everybody else is doing it, then it's poo-pooed. Now, please, that ain't gonna work. It's not gonna do. It's not gonna that. Well, Janique stayed around for 8 years with progressive MS, and progressive MS, to date, they still have no cure for progressive MS. They give people pills and they give people different things, but there isn't a cure for it. And my journey with her was looking for a cure. And going down roads, realizing that there were various people who, for various reasons, wouldn't tell the truth. So, would want me to give her various drugs and whatever else because it was experimenting with her life. And I wasn't going to do that. So I basically took total control and decided against a lot of things that normal medicines then would say would be things that would work. But as I said to you, there is no cure for progressive MS. So giving people various drugs saying that it will help, it's part of the guinea pig, I call it, scenario, where they're testing you out on various things. But again, nobody was doing research on black people. So these drugs that they were giving to you, right, weren't being tested on black people. So those black people who did take those drugs made it worse for them. There were various things that I'd seen during that period of time with black people who had MS that would make your blood boil. It would make you go cold. It would make the hairs on the back of your head stand up because you cannot believe that people would do that, and they are doctors, would do that to other human beings. So it was, for me, I think I was one of the luckiest human beings on earth to go through both of those scenarios. It changed me as a human being. It made me a better man. It made me have the patience to be able to not lose my temper, but be able to suppress, learn, and be able to go and say to somebody, now tell me, what is that drug made of? And if you couldn't tell me what the drug is made of, how come you're administering it to me? Why would you be administering something to a patient that you don't know how it's made? You don't know what's within it. So you've been told that it's good. And I must go off of the basis that you've been told that it's good by somebody who told you that it's good. But you can't tell me what the compound is. What's it made of? So I'm scared of you because you're obviously, right, you ain't a leader, you're a follower. So within your space, if you're told that this is made of steel, you won't even check it to see whether or not. You've been told it is, so you believe it. So now you're going to tell me. I'm going to say, how come you're 100% sure? Oh, because the guy who told me, he does. But you don't know. For sure, but you're telling me something that you're 100% sure about. So it really did give me that chance to see people for what they truly were. And that's not putting anybody in a bad light. That's just saying that I got the chance to learn about people. I got the chance to learn about a disease. I got the chance to live with two people who showed me that what was important was my relationship with both of those two people was paramount. Anything else didn't truly matter. As much as both of those people would want me to go out and tour, would want me to do all the things that I was doing before. They didn't want me to stop. But I chose to stop because I realized that as much as I love what I do to the max, I didn't love what I did and do more than I loved them. They were what were important. They were what this was about. They were the fun to have done something and get a phone call from them that they heard the new record or they heard it and it sounded great. Their phone calls were the best. You know, they were absolutely the best. And I give thanks for both of them to have been in my life. Because I could have gone down that road of continuing to say, this is what's incredibly important. I've got to get another hit record. I've got to be on the London Palladium. I've got to play in New York. I've got to. When really, all I needed to do is love these people around me. And they would give me back that love. And that would be the nourishment that you needed to do what you're doing.
My very deep condolences and also
Thank you.
congratulations for your own transformation in
Thank
all this mess. So I
you.
assume
Yeah,
that this period was a period with a lot of soul searching for yourself as well, of course.
very much so.
Was
Yeah, very much.
Prisoner of Hope, was that a result of this period?
Yeah, very much so. I had been living in a way whereby I was in the prison and I needed to understand, right, being a prisoner of hope, being in this prison, if you like, with these two women and doing everything, hoping for the best outcome, right, concerning them. So yes, I had to do a lot of soul searching. Who am I? What am I? Right? What do you truly believe? Right? What do you stand for? Right? What what is your ultimate desire in life? What is it? Are you a materialistic guy? You know, I need a new car, I need a house, I need a this, I need a that. Right? You know, I was never ever materialistic. So I never found the perfect car, or I never found the perfect house. I didn't want a house in Monaco, a house in Jamaica, and a house in England, and a house. I didn't see the sense when you could only live in one. It's like, why have 4 toilets and you can only use one, right? Why have 10 cars when you can only drive one, right? All of this, what you are being pushed to perceive as what you should have because of what you're doing, that was never me. And it was both of them, right, showed me that to the fullest. During the period of time of Janique, I had offers of tours that would have brought me at the end of the year and made me a millionaire. And I turned them down, and people would say, "You're crazy, you're mad, right? You can go out there, you can get somebody to come in and look after her." And I'm like, why would I want to do that? Why am I rushing the money? Why is money my driver? Why is it that money now is the most important thing? I've got to get that money. I've got to get that money. So I need to make another record. I need to go out on the road. Who can I work with? Because I need to have people know that I'm still here. That's panic. That's panic. That's stress. That's all the things that I've been brought up not to be a part of. So I'd rather not. And then you realize that people don't ring you anymore. Right? They stop ringing because you're not prepared to go out there. You're not prepared to do what they want you to do. So they don't ring you anymore. And at first, that was the big thing. That really did hurt. Because I was like, wow, I thought you people would be there for me. I thought you people were genuine. And then you realize that, like, people are only genuine in this game when you're making money. And when you're not making money, it's very, very simple for them. Close the door. who's that, Junior? You know, right? So after a while, as I said, it hurts at first. But once you realize what you're in, why people act the way that they do, the demons that they carry that you wouldn't want to know about, and you realize that, like, I don't need in that way. My need is not that. My need is to touch you. My need is to make a record that when you put it on, you smile, you're singing along. It's touched you. It's touched here, right? That's what I need,
I often
right?
say that music should not be analyzed, it should be felt.
Exactly. When you lose, people used to analyze my music to the point whereby it was like, what machine did you record this on? And what did you record that on? And, what was the reverbs that you use? And did you use an analog desk, an analog desk to mix the tracks after using, whatever, the digital? I'd be like, we just made a record. I'm not really, I don't like digital because it was too clinical. It sounded too clean, too clinical, top end wants to cut off your ears. So I've never liked it, right? I've always liked analog because analog was always warm and passionate, and you could feel analog. You could feel that warmth. Digital was just too clean, too mechanical, too so away from being human. And the analog was, to me, warm, was us, was human beings, was close, was you could feel him, you could feel that warmth, you could put reverbs in there and do delayed on your reverb to bounce into another reverb, and it would just sound like a new colour that you've added to your work. I wouldn't get away from that. I love the SSL desk. I was never a fan of, right, from its conception. Even now, that people still use that kind of technology. I'm still not a fan. I just think it's just too unreal to me. It doesn't feel. It's like when you have a band and we've got a metronome. And I'm like, but I grew up with drummers being able to keep time, not drummers having to listen to the metronome so that they can keep
And
time.
sometimes imperfection makes perfection.
I think that's what happened with Mama Used to Say. I think that's what happened with all of my early records. They were imperfect. There was things going on, right, that made you sit back and, mate, I wonder if people are going to hear that. I wonder if people are going to know, right? And then you put the thing out and people just feel your music. They feel you. And you then realize that, like, I used to tell musicians I work with, simple, stupid, please. And everybody would laugh. But that's what it was. If you could make it simple so that people just got it, opposed to trying to be so analytical about it and, no. That bass drum is just out by this millimeter. So what we have to do is we have to pull the whole track to here and pull. By the time you've done all of that, you've lost me. I'm somewhere else. Now, when I went to college and I did what they call a City and Guilds, which would be like a degree in computer programming. So I passed with a 1 in this degree. Hate computers, personally.
You're an old man now, Junior.
Exactly. Cannot stand them. I'm still a lover of getting together with 5 musicians, 2 or 3 girl singers, getting into a rehearsal room, hear the songs, and let's thrash them out. Let's make a sound, and let's make everybody sweat in here today. Right? Let's get something here that when we go on stage, we know it's gonna work. We know that feel that we're giving off. Others are gonna feel it.